Raul Santana was sitting in the intern's room, wearily leaning his back, stiff from standing so much, against the soft plush of a small couch. The operation lasted more than 6 hours. At first everyone thought that the guy who had been brought in with a terrible knife wound would simply not survive. However, Raul was professional enough to prevent it. Still, it was not in vain that Dr. Santana was considered a first-class specialist, one of the few in the country who took on the most seemingly intractable cases. Here again, according to all the risk indicators, the possibility of saving the patient was reduced, perhaps, to zero. Too much blood and time had been lost. But Santana not only managed to save the guy's life, he managed to sew up the wound in such a way that the scar would not only not ruin his appearance, but, on the contrary, would improve it. No joke, during a game depicting medieval sword fights, the patient fell on his own weapon and almost on his face. The guy's neck and the whole right cheek were severely cut, arteries and nerves were miraculously not damaged by the blade of the sword. The specialists of that ambulance took the dying man directly to a private clinic, where Santana worked. They understood perfectly well that in a public hospital they would not have time to help the child. Raul was almost a living legend in medical circles, and therefore the doctors were hopeful that the surgeon could create another miracle, and they were not wrong. However, few people could imagine how such miracles were given to such a brilliant surgeon. Raul was only 47 years old, but sometimes he felt like a 100-year-old man. When faced with a really difficult case, the man invested in saving such a patient not only his professional skills, but absolutely all his mental strength. That is why he was sometimes called Archangel, alluding to a certain mystical power that was in the surgeon's hands at the moment when another critically ill patient was in his hands. Dr. Santana fought for every human life to the end, and never fixed the economic status of the patients. Thanks to Dr. Raul, dozens of lives were saved, and he often trained young staff at the Ministry of Emergencies and gave lectures on first aid in extreme situations. Because of this, colleagues respected Dr. Santana immensely and were sometimes surprised by his efficiency. If necessary, the surgeon could stay in the clinic for days, observing the condition of a particular patient. However, this by no means meant that Raul Santana was a kind of living robot. On the contrary, his emotional side developed no worse than his intellectual one, and, therefore, the specialist sometimes had to restrain himself with incredible difficulty from being imbued with feelings for people whose lives, because of a fatal accident, turned out to depend entirely on his medical skills. The surgeon absorbed the love for medicine, as they say, like mother's milk. Santana's parents worked as doctors at the National Hospital, and his father, in addition, participated in several special operations in combat zones as a military field doctor. All their lives, Raul Santana's father and mother were dedicated to fulfilling their medical oath and duty. Raul's mother, Larissa Cordoba, worked half of her life as a plastic surgeon, but not in the private sector, but in the public sector. She corrected defects that people had in various traumatic situations, or due to hereditary changes in their bodies, when genetics suddenly played a bad joke on people and had an extremely detrimental effect on their appearance. Dr. Larissa de Cordoba worked exactly up to the moment she was diagnosed with arthritis in her wrist joints. Every day she found it more and more difficult to hold surgical instruments in her hands, and she could not afford to risk the health and lives of her patients, so she voluntarily retired almost immediately after receiving the diagnosis that was so disappointing for her. Santana, as far as he could remember, always admired his parents, so no one was especially surprised when, after school, like them, he decided to connect his life with medicine. Fortunately, since childhood, the father and mother instilled in their son the right moral concepts and values, in particular, the ability to respect and accept any human life, regardless of how much money is in the wallet of the owner of this very life. In many ways, this approach affected young Raul's attitude towards money. It cannot be said that he particularly pursued wealth and material well-being. The boy had enough of what he already had. Satisfied with the essentials, young Santana learned not to divide patients into rich and poor. If a person urgently needed help, even if he was the poorest homeless person, Raul had to provide this help, and he did, without any disdain. This approach, to some extent, shocked his colleagues at the time. Santana, who at first worked in the most common hospital in the city, really did not agree with the chief physician, when late at night, sometimes, there were patients who came to them, without documents and without a certain place of residence. However, the young surgeon was not at all worried about this and, despite the reproaches of the chief physician, he tried to do everything possible so that, after a while, those patients could leave his hospital healthy and, as they say, walking on the right foot. What Santana really didn't like in that hospital was bribes. This man had his own code of honor, where this very delicate word was written in red letters. He saw too many cases where rich parents of reckless young students literally gave wads of cash to the head of the department and some other doctors, just to let go their negligent son or daughter after a monstrous overdose. Or, on the contrary, they wanted to buy a place in the waiting line to receive a vital organ transplant, while other ordinary people had to wait their turn for years. All this caused Santana an undisguised disgust, but he felt even more contempt for the very doctors who did not hesitate to accept these bribes, thus putting one life above another. Once, the surgeon from his heart expressed all this to one of his old acquaintances and former colleagues, who has been in the private sector for several years. He invited Raul Santana to a cup of coffee on the occasion of a celebratory meeting, and listened with interest to his opinion about corrupt specialists. "That's the last straw, Benja," Raul complained to his friend about his colleagues. "And the saddest part of it all, you know what it is? Yes, it's the same in almost every hospital. But we work in the capital. We represent, you could say, the face of national medicine. I'm ashamed of them, and I can't understand them." "What is there to understand, Raul?" Benjamin smiled sadly at his friend. "Here the explanation is very simple. They need money, that says it all. You yourself know what the salaries are now in the public sector and, after the optimization, what happened to the national budget. In general, it is not for me to explain to you. Exactly, that's why I went into the private sector, how this whole issue of my clinic started. Of course, I had to borrow money, but what can you do? Nowadays, you don't do a single decent business without loans, especially a private clinic. The equipment alone costs several million. And you also have to pay taxes." The men talked some more on the subject of modern medical care, after which the former colleague unexpectedly offered Santana to go to work for him. Raul was quite surprised by such a proposal. "I don't know, Benjamin Carranza, what can you say to that?" Santana hesitated. Working in a private clinic is not the same as working in the public sector. Their standards are stricter and, in general, can you get used to my politics? Benjamin just smiled mischievously at his old friend. That the standards are stricter, you're right about that. Because of course, after all, you didn't graduate from a vocational school, did you? The whole capital has already heard about your achievements. What's the point of keeping such a valuable specialist like you on a starvation ration in a state hospital? Believe me, our workday is no different from yours. The only difference is that patients know where they are going and that they will have to pay to visit us. There are no bribes or anything, because everything has already been paid, everything is carried in order, do you understand? And the rest, it's the same patients, the same problems, only, instead of bureaucracy, there is a quite specific price tag." Raul shook his head hesitantly. "But what about ordinary people?" Benjamin bowed his head in understanding as he confidently cut a pastry served with coffee on his china plate. "To be honest, we do not have them very often. However," and confidently put in his mouth a piece of dessert, accompanying it with a large sip of a dark aromatic drink, "in this case, our clinic has a special fee. For example, if all hospitals are busy, or if the patient is already no time and there is a risk of premature death, such patients are sent to us by default. They do not have to pay for anything, we have the opportunity to do something good without financially burdening a person." "It's an interesting philosophy," Santana slurred, thoughtfully. "You see, this is what you should think about, Raul. Think about it for a weekend. If you decide, call me. I'll leave you a business card. We really need specialists of your level. The salary won't be bad for you, it will be enough not only for coffee. The knowledge you have is worth its weight in gold. Yes, and your medical intuition is from God, this is now very rare, believe me. It would be a sin if you waste your talent and years of work in a rotten hospital. Santana later often recalled that conversation. To some extent, Benjamin turned out to be right. If he had not come to him then, there is no telling what would have become of his career now. In fact, it could happen that the best years of his work, as a young surgeon at that time, could be wasted in endless confrontations with the completely corrupt managers of that city hospital. Not long ago, this man saw on the internet an extensive report demanding the closure of this nefarious institution and the arrest of its chief physician. And again, Raul Santana's intuition did not let him down. It turned out that, for several years, the hospital director had been illegally trading in donor organs illegally harvested from deceased patients. When the face of his former department head appeared in the news, Santana even cringed in disgust. Now, Raul Santana has been successfully working in his friend's clinic for more than 15 years, and all this time he has periodically treated completely ordinary citizens absolutely free of charge. In this part of the agreement, Benjamin did not lie to him. This fee really existed and, because of it, Santana was more than once lucky enough to save many good people. If in the professional sphere Raul was more than successful in his private life, unfortunately, everything was exactly the opposite. His wife, Teresa, left the surgeon 5 years ago, when it was no longer possible to hide his numerous infidelities from her husband. Working as a public relations manager in a large media and advertising company, Teresa often assisted the clinic's director, Benjamin himself, in preparing advertisements and press conferences that could once again raise the prestige of his institution among the secular public. At first, Raul himself even rejoiced at such an initiative of his wife. The more sponsors and patrons they could attract to their side, the greater the quota, within which Santana could save ordinary people. The problem came, however, from where they did not expect it. Very soon, Raul began to notice that his wife was staying too long at meetings and so-called business lunches. The woman began to periodically spend the night out of the house, or even arrive later than Santana himself, and not always in a sober state. Teresa would respond to all of her husband's questions in the same way. "I was busy," or, "Oh, my love, I had such a difficult meeting, a horror." "Well, that's why we went with the girls from the financial department to the cafe, to relax a bit." "What's wrong with you?" "I only had a couple of drinks." Thus 3 years passed, during which Raul was constantly forced to endure the periodic absence of his wife and, as a result, a drama. Everything was resolved quite unexpectedly, once the surgeon took on a day shift after another long sleepless night. Teresa was simply not at home, and her phone constantly told Raul in an answering machine voice that his wife was not available at the moment. As he was walking through the physical therapy department, he suddenly heard a familiar voice coming from the resident physician's lounge. Involuntarily hearing the sounds of laughter and kissing, Raul was surprised to recognize his wife's voice. Overcoming the remaining distance to the resident's lounge with quick steps, Santana opened the door with a sudden movement. The first thing that caught the surgeon's eye was a glass coffee table, on which were beautifully arranged a bottle of wine in 2 glasses. Nearby was a plate of cheese slices and an open box of chocolates. In one of the glasses were traces of lipstick, the color of which was painfully familiar to Santana. "Raul, what are you doing here?" He heard in the next second the indignant shout of his wife. The surgeon slowly looked up at his half-naked wife, shyly hiding behind a white medical gown. Sitting next to him, discouraged by the situation, was a young physiotherapist, with whom Raul periodically met in the dining room and discussed the latest news from the world of sports. Both men were very fond of soccer and field hockey. The guy looked down sheepishly, as there was no point in saying anything and making excuses in this case. "What am I doing here?" Actually, Nicholas and I nodded to the physiotherapist. "We both work here." "What have you been doing with him all this time?" "Nico, why are you silent, like a mute?" Teresa nudged her suddenly numb lover with her shoulder. "Say something to him." "Raul Santana, this is..." "Sorry, the truth is that Teresa and I have been dating for a long time. We just didn't want to worry you too much. You have enough with these surgeries of yours. Every day is stressful." The physical therapist hesitantly reached for his shirt, trying to fasten the buttons with trembling fingers. Raoul just smiled bitterly. Every day is stressful, he repeated the guy's last words. That's for sure. You, Nicholas, get ready to work calmly, otherwise the head of the department will come now, and he will find you here in this form. It's not good in any way. With you, Teresa, we'll talk at home, and please be on time today. Having said this, Raoul quietly left the intern room under the scowl of his unfaithful wife, allowing him and his lover to tidy up without prying eyes from outside. In the evening, an unpleasant conversation awaited the spouses at home. Much to Teresa's chagrin, Raoul did not give her violent scenes and scandals with broken dishes. The man just wanted to know why his wife suddenly decided that it would be better to be with someone else than with him. Of course, he was incredibly hurt. After all, this kind of betrayal hurts a lot. Why, and don't you think so yourself? His wife asked in a mocking tone. Sometimes it seems to me that you don't care about anything, whether I'm at home, whether I'm not. You've rested in this job of yours, and you don't notice anything around. I needed your attention, you know? Love? God bless you, you yourself don't really know if you love me, and you never did. But you could at least remember that we had a wedding anniversary last week, couldn't you? But I'm not old yet. Raoul and Nicholas, like nobody else, helped me feel it. You know we've been together for 3 years now? Santana felt her hands clasped on her knees, wrapped in an icy cold. She slowly looked up at Teresa. 3 years? He asked hoarsely. And you were silent all this time? But why, tear, what for? The wife just shook her blonde hair in disgust. Yes, Raoul. Because I waited until the end, that maybe you would suspect something, you would start to be jealous of me. In the end, I still hoped we would have a child. The woman quickly wiped a single tear from her cheek. But it's clear that you won't have children at all, it's all over, you're done with your operations. You work 24 hours on your feet, what's that? Pay attention to your wife. The subject of children has always been an unhealthy one for the Santanas. Almost all the 20 years that the couple lived together, they constantly tried to have a child, but the couple was unsuccessful. Even in vitro fertilization, which Teresa went through 4 times, did not help. The woman blamed her husband for what happened all the time, hinting at the man's inability to have children. However, no matter how many examinations the surgeon had in this regard, he did not find any special problems. As for Teresa, he was adamantly opposed even to the very idea that something might be wrong with her. Surprisingly, his tests also showed nothing special, i.e., the reason for the couple's childlessness lay elsewhere. Have you thought that you have not been able to have children all these years just because there may be a banal physiological incompatibility between you? The doctor who observed him once asked Raoul. Is that it? The surgeon didn't quite understand. Are you saying we're not compatible? Not really, he cautioned the now anxious man. You see, sometimes it happens that spouses love each other, but they can't have children. And not because they have some fertility problems in the family, although this option is also not excluded, but because their bodies do not physically react to each other in the way necessary to create offspring. Nature, so to speak, hints to people that they'd better not even try, you know? Still, nothing good will come of it. Your body and your wife's body may initially tune in completely different ways and, so to speak, synchronization is simply impossible. Raoul left the clinic that day, deep in thought. Perhaps there was some truth in the fertility specialist's words. After all, Elle and Teresa never really loved each other. And if there is no love, then why, in this case, should children be born into their family? It was from that moment that his wife began to take an active interest in the clinic where he worked and increasingly linger at meetings in his office. Having estimated all the terms, Santana realized that here Teresa was definitely telling him the truth. His betrayals had lasted a little more than 3 years. I made a decision, Santana, said his wife in a trembling voice. Tomorrow I will pack my things and move in with Nicholas. We will ask for a divorce as soon as the documents for the division of assets arrive. And don't worry, I won't claim your country house, you get yourself and your tomatoes in there. His wife's high-pitched voice brought the surgeon from his memories to the present moment. Raoul knew well that Teresa never liked to mess with the flower beds and weeding, and so he took what his wife said rather ironically. "You know, maybe you're right," Raoul said at last. "We've lived together for so many years, but we haven't seen happiness. Do what you know. I hope you'll find the happiness you've been waiting for with Nicholas." The wife kept her promise and left the next day. True, she never managed to catch her long-awaited female happiness. After a couple of months, for an unknown reason, Nicholas abandoned his clinic and moved to another city. Teresa, of course, was the last to know about this. At that time, Ella and Raoul had already managed to profitably sell a common apartment, and with the money received during the divorce, Santana acquired a nice studio not far from his workplace. He gave the car to his wife as a gift, and now went to work on foot, seeing in it, above all, concern for his own health. Teresa, after Nicholas' sudden betrayal, tried to mend the burned bridges with Raoul himself. However, Santana did not want to enter the same river for the second time. Therefore, the ex-wife herself asked the health authorities for a transfer to the north of the capital to get away from the bad memories and try to start the second half of her life from scratch. Raoul Santana, for his part, also perceived his ex-wife's unexpected breakup with her lover as a new attempt to improve his own life. Now that he was no longer burdened by constant worries about his ex-wife, he could concentrate entirely on his beloved work. The immersion in everyday medical life, to some extent, helped Santana's spiritual wound to heal. Saving human lives every day, the surgeon seemed to be trying to prove to himself that he could still bring benefits to this world, and that resentment against a woman could not overshadow all the good that still remained in his life. Sometimes, however, returning to an empty apartment, Raoul Santana began to experience acute bouts of loneliness, involuntarily plunging into an abyss of memories. Sitting in the evening in front of the open window, the doctor recalled the times of his student youth, that sweet and at the same time bitter moment, when he loved himself and was loved by a wonderful girl who gave the then student a lot of joyful and impressive moments. However, those days were behind him, and now, for Santana, the meaning of his whole life was medical practice. The clinic became almost a home for the man, where he spent most of his time. The second half, the surgeon preferred to spend with his faithful dog, Chapulin, who became a true emotional support for him. Raoul Santana picked up Chapulin when he was a puppy. He found the little puppy at some gate on his way to work. The little puppy was whimpering loudly. It was evident that he had recently opened his eyes, but by fate he was left alone. Santana felt sorry for the puppy to the point of feeling pain in his heart, so he decided to take him in and keep him. At first, the man even had to feed the puppy milk from a bottle, but very soon the puppy grew up and started eating regular dog food, which made life easier for his eternally busy owner. At work, they often laughed at the surgeon, saying that, in his old age, he has finally had a son, albeit with a tail and 4 legs. Santana just laughed. Now he will have a true friend who will not let him fall into the abyss of nostalgia and self-flagellation. Chapulin grew into a strong, handsome dog, with a variegated coat and a large fur collar that made him look a bit like the husky breed. The large brown eyes in his face were thickly rimmed with a black border. In fact, because of this feature, which gave the dog a resemblance to American actor Charles Chaplin when he was still a puppy, he received his nickname Chapulin from his owner. The dog every evening or morning, depending on Santana's duty, greeted the man with barks of joy and wagging his magnificent tail. At the same time, Chapulin reacted very subtly to his master's mood, and always guessed exactly when he should approach him to ask him to play, and when he should be quiet and give the tired surgeon a rest. Santana adored his 4-legged companion. They seemed to understand each other without saying words. In their free time, they often walked through the city's central park, and many dog lovers, seeing them from afar, would happily return the greeting, inviting them to keep each other company. Once, strolling through the city with Chapulin on his day off, Santana witnessed a rather strange sight. Passing by the bus station, Raoul Santana's attention was caught by a young pregnant woman discussing something with a cab driver. Drivers, offering their services at competitive prices, lined the roadside, hailing visitors and attracting citizens hurrying about their chores. Santana would never have looked in the direction of that stranger if it were not for one but the future mother was dressed very poorly, almost in rags. An old blue jacket was worn down to the elbows to holes, a long skirt with an elastic band was nothing more than a piece of the cheapest lina, which was scattered from its fragility over the already protruding belly of the girl. The image was complemented by old flat-soled sneakers, clearly found in the trash, and knitted stockings of different lengths. In the hands of the pregnant woman, a small bouquet of carnations modestly curled up. Over her head, protecting her from the damp spring wind, waved a simple gray scarf. The girl, in tears, begged one of the cab drivers to take her somewhere, which the surgeon did not hear, but the drivers responded to all her pleas in the same way. "Listen, girl, you don't let honest people earn money, huh?" they said. "I'll take you for at least $40. Understand?" A man with an Oriental accent was clearly annoyed by the persistence of the ornery customer. "But I only have 200, the girl almost sobbed. "Please, what are you doing on a day like this? I really need it, you know? Soon, perhaps, it won't be possible for me to go out anywhere." The pregnant woman looked at the driver, carefully stroking her belly protruding from under the skirt. "Morales, why are you standing there talking to this beggar woman?" He approached the second driver. "Is there something you don't understand, you wretch? Do you want to stay with your son?" The girl was surprised by such rudeness, and just blinked her huge eyes, nodding affirmatively. "Well, that's it, he's out of here then." The man stumbled up behind him, approaching menacingly. "Or maybe you want to pay another way?" Santana quickly approached the pregnant woman, shielding her back from the insolent driver. Chapulin barked loudly, forcing him to back away. "Hey man! What do you want?" "Nothing," replied Raul Santana calmly. "Stop threatening the girl, otherwise I'll call the police now and all your flirting will vanish instantly." The brazen driver in response only raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture, saying that he didn't need any trouble. Santana, on the other hand, turned around to look at the pregnant girl and, taking out his wallet from his jacket, pulled out $30, after which he handed it to the frightened girl. "Here, take it. I see that you really need to be in that place. Morales will take you there safe and sound. Isn't that right, Morales?" The surgeon looked sadly at the Oriental-looking chauffeur, who a minute ago was trying to get rid of the beggar girl. Of course I'll take her. Why not? There's money, there's a way. Sit down, girl, relax." The driver tried to smile faintly, but didn't do so very well. "Is it really for me?" the pregnant stranger asked Raul Santana in surprise. "God, thank you very much. I'll give it back to you, I promise. You write me your address, I'll send it to you by mail." "Calm down," the man interrupted her. "I don't need anything from you. This is insignificant to me, but it's much more important to you now." The surgeon was a little surprised at such a sincere show of gratitude. After all, he, for his part, showed purely human sympathy for the girl and, of course, did it without a second thought, without expecting anything in return. Sniffing her nose for the approaching tears, the mother-to-be said in a trembling voice, "Thank you again. Today is a very special day for me, my mother's birthday, so I wanted to give her a present." Embarrassed, she looked her unexpected benefactor straight in the eye. She looked like she was 20 years old. Raul Santana simply shrugged his shoulders. "Of course, it is entirely up to you what to spend this money on. Just be careful, please. In your state, you should avoid too strong emotions." The girl smiled a little, after which she got into the cab. At that moment, Morales had already managed to open the door in front of her. Santana, with his dog, went for a walk, casting one last warning glance at the cab drivers remaining on the road. On his way home, the surgeon heard the phone vibrating insistently in his jacket pocket. Looking at the screen, the man nodded with satisfaction. He was called by a private detective, whom he had hired a couple of months ago to get information for himself. "Hello, Raul Santana? Victor Chavez is calling you. Dahlia Detective Agency, remember?" "Of course," agreed Santana. "To be honest, I didn't expect the results to be so fast. Did you find anything? The voice on the other end of the phone laughed with an air of, and not something, but a lot of something, Raul Santana. You have no idea how much dust I had to swallow in the city archives, and how many cards I shuffled to find the information you needed. That is why I paid you such a generous advance, Victor Chavez. Santana replied in response. I hope there is some specific data? Yes, I am sending you a file now, everything you wanted to know is there. A second later, the surgeon's phone beeped softly, announcing the arrival of a new email. After opening it, Santana found a text file, and inside was structured all the information he needed. The results of the investigation were compiled at the end, in a separate list. The detective hurried to express the most important thing to his client. I'm afraid you'll have to go to the cemetery. Alley number 8, row 26, third grave on the right, there she is buried, your first love. 20 years ago. Santana thanked Sanchez and assured him that the remainder of the fee would be credited to his account in the near future. After that, the surgeon took Chapulin home, filled him with food, and then took a discreet rental car, in which he drove to the cemetery indicated in the report. The wind was very strong that day. Wrapped in the skirts of his dark coat, Raul Santana wandered through the cemetery, looking for the grave of his only beloved woman among hundreds of gray tombstones. Soon, he managed to find the right spot. To the surgeon's surprise, the grave of his beloved was well cared for. The fence had been recently painted black, with no debris, a clean and modest marble monument, with a serpentine portrait insert, depicting a happy woman who smiled a lot during her lifetime. Fresh flowers lay on the grave, a bouquet of red carnations, which for some reason seemed vaguely familiar to Raul Santana. You? What are you doing here? A female voice was heard not far from Santana. Turning around, he saw the very pregnant girl to whom he had given money for a cab this morning. In the girl's hands was a bottle with water and a rag. Obviously, she was going to clean this particular grave. Santana felt his head spinning violently. Feeling that a state of shock was about to wash over him like a wave, the man in a low voice asked the beggar woman, Wait. Who are you? Who are you to this woman? The pregnant woman just looked blankly at Raul Santana. Putting the bottle down, she wiped her dirty hands on the hem of her skirt before answering, Well, this is my mother, Maria del Carmen Sosa. She died 20 years ago, when I was 2 or 3 years old. I don't remember exactly. You knew her, didn't you? Only then did Santana notice how much this unfortunate girl resembled the first and only love of his life. The same wavy brown hair that fell over her shoulders in a thick cascade. The same huge gray eyes, which had a unique feature. In moments of happiness, they acquire the lightest bluish tint. The same snow-white, almost porcelain skin. Raul Santana could swear that it was as soft and velvety to the touch as his mother's. And you? What is your name? Holding back with the last of his strength, the surgeon asked the girl. Milena Sosa. Still looking at him with bewilderment, replied the young mother. So you knew my mother, did you? Santana felt his eyes fill with burning tears. Painful images of his own past began to appear before the man's inner gaze. There was exactly the same amount of joy and love in him, how much suffering and disappointment. With Maria del Carmen, Raul Santana met in the most common dining room. He was then in his 5th year of medical school and dreamed of a career as a cardiac surgeon. On breaks, Raul and his friends would often look in a small but cozy dining room, which was located a couple of blocks from his college. It was there, in the checkout line, that he first saw her, a girl with a mane of brown hair and infinite eyes the color of a gray sky. Will you have cakes? Then Raul asked the girl who was standing in front, cautiously eyeing the last 2 cakes out of the corner of her eye, sitting alone in front of a display case with cakes. It depends on what these cakes are with, replied the stranger smiling. If, for example, with potatoes there, or with beans, definitely not. But if they are with chicken or jam, then yes. Phew, thank God. Raul exhaled with relief. These are just with potatoes. I didn't think baking would be so interesting to medical students, the girl joked, laughing out loud. Raul was scalded like boiling water. How do you know this? Asked the student, astonished by the girl's observation. She just smiled slyly in response. Well, the issue here is not complicated. From you doctors, medical alcohol is a mile away, and it smells like all kinds of medicine. If it weren't for the open windows, you might asphyxiate. The girl laughed again, and Raoul longed to hear the sound of her voice forever. The same day, the young people were returning home from the classes they had together. Young Santana volunteered to accompany the girl to her neighborhood. Maria del Carmen studied at a vocational school, specializing in dressmaking. She knew many interesting things about the characteristics of fabrics and the construction of winning designs in clothing, and she really hoped that one day she could become a real fashion designer. The girl's cheerfulness and determination impressed Raoul very much, so that soon, even he himself did not realize how he fell madly in love with her. Fortunately, Maria del Carmen Sosa reciprocated his feelings, and an all-consuming fire of true youthful passion instantly erupted between the couple. Milena liked Raoul's funny stories about his medical practice, and she really wanted him to be able to achieve everything he wanted to achieve for himself in the coming years. The only dark spot in the girl's life was her own parents. It just so happened that the future fashion designer grew up in a family of alcoholics and outcasts. Her mother was a heavy alcoholic and, due to her extremely difficult situation with money, she sometimes sold her own body to get a few more drinks and at least some food. The girl had no father as such. There was only a stepfather, just as alcoholic as her mother, but with an even more damaging addiction to card games. In the end, it got to the point where there were only bare walls of furniture left in her apartment and an empty closet. Milena's parents sold absolutely everything. At first, the girl still tried to somehow control her mother's alcohol, and even worked as a cutting assistant in a local shop, trying to inspire her parents to return to normal life by her example. Soon enough, however, Milena realized that alcohol on the table and money in her pocket to play gambling are much more important to her parents, and they consider their daughter exclusively as the sole breadwinner of the family. The girl did not tolerate such a lifestyle and left her parents to live with her grandmother. She warmly accepted her granddaughter. She, like Maria del Carmen, for a long time tried to influence her unfortunate daughter, but all her attempts ended the same way. The girl's mother would stay sober for a couple of weeks, sometimes even kicking out her roommate, and then she would collapse, and it would start all over again. Raoul for a long time did not know about the history of his girlfriend's parents, but a bird in the window had already managed to bring all the necessary information to the parents of the future surgeon. Naturally, the father and mother of the Santanas were resolutely against the communication of their son with the daughter of miserable drunks. Therefore, when Raoul happily told them that he wanted to introduce them to his future wife, Larissa de Córdoba and Andrés Córdoba accepted this news with hostility. And forget about this Maria del Carmen, son. Her mother is a drunk woman. Larissa de Córdoba tried to reason with Raoul. How are we going to look decent people in the eye after that? But you haven't even seen it. Raoul objected in response. And besides, I don't want to marry her parents, but her. Please give us a chance. Let me introduce her to you. Maria is an absolutely amazing girl. She's not like her parents. Understand, Raoul, said the father sternly, no one disputes the fact that your Maria is a good girl. She may be good, but only now, while she is still young. But as soon as she reaches a certain age, her bad blood will make itself felt. And then, son, you won't be able to do anything with your inheritance. You know, it's science. Your dad is right. The mother nodded her head. Think about it yourself. What will he pass on to his children with those genes? That's nonsense. Raoul felt his blood boil in his veins with indignation. Say what you want, and I only want to live with Maria del Carmen and no one else. With these words, the boy, with all his might, slammed his fist on the table and ran out of his parents' house. That night, Raoul and Maria del Carmen were sitting on the roof of a 9-story building, where the girl lived with her grandmother. The summer breeze gently ruffled Maria del Carmen's beautiful hair, making it shine with mysterious brown tints in the light of the street lamps. The young people wrapped themselves in a huge woolen blanket and quietly enjoyed the beauty of that June night. The future surgeon took a small velvet box out of his pocket and solemnly handed it to the girl. Opening it, he saw inside an elegant silver medallion in the shape of a dove, next to which lay the same silver chain, shining in the evening light. "What is this?" Maria asked in surprise, and a little embarrassed. This will be a symbol of our eternal loyalty to each other," Raoul said, breathless with emotion, and leaned back on the edge of her neck. Around his neck she had the exact same chain. My God, what a beauty! Amor tried unsuccessfully to keep a happy smile on her face. Raoul helped her fasten the jewel around her neck, after which he gently kissed his beloved. "My Maria, I would only have to endure a couple more months to defend my thesis, and that's it. I promise, we will get married as soon as I graduate from university. Of course, the first time with housing will not be very good, but they will surely send me to practice in some distant city, as they distribute us. And they will provide housing there, we won't get lost, love. Just trust me, and that's it." "Oh, Raulito, what a dreamer you are!" The girl laughed in response. "And what am I going to do there, in that distant city of yours? Have you thought about it? I have 1 more year to study." "We'll arrange a transfer for you," the boy promised her earnestly. "I'll talk to whoever I have to talk to, my father has good contacts, and you'll definitely transfer. Besides," Raoul added, smiling, "you'll even keep your scholarship." The young people remembered that night for the rest of their lives, because it was the happiest night of their lives. But then, suddenly, it all came crashing down. About a week after this fateful conversation, Maria del Carmen suddenly disappeared. There was no place where her young fiancé did not look for her, both at her drunken parents' house and at her grandmother's apartment, but he could not find her. The latter told Raoul that Maria had unexpectedly packed her things and left. Where and why, the girl said nothing to anyone about this. At the sewing school, Santana couldn't find out either. Her love seemed to have been lost in the water, leaving no clue where to look for it. After another week, Raoul's parents asked for a conversation again. They told the guy that their Maria Carmen left with a local hustler, on a fashionable foreign motorcycle. He was the one who took her to a faraway place, in the north of the country, so it no longer made sense for Raoul to look for his unfaithful girlfriend. As proof, the father brought his son a kind of letter, written retroactively. It was supposedly written on behalf of his beloved, said that she was leaving town forever, and asked the future surgeon never to look for her or bother her. Raoul remembered well how the world then seemed to turn black and red for him, hatred and jealousy, that was all he felt at that terrible moment. Having believed his parents, the boy immersed himself fully in his studies and, after having brilliantly defended his thesis, he immediately entered graduate school and began to combine his studies with practice in one of the most prestigious hospitals in the capital. Only now, leafing through the research materials sent to him by the detective, Raoul discovered that his mother and father had blatantly deceived him at the time. In fact, Maria had never met any biker. She, as well as Santana, was told that Raoul had another, much more promising girlfriend. Therefore, the seamstress had no business being next to one of the most respected families in town. Heartbroken, Maria was forced to leave for real, and Raoul soon met Teresa herself, who became a more suitable girl for him. As a result, the promising marriage turned into long years of moral and physical captivity for the surgeon Santana. Thus, the young doctor's parents unknowingly managed to destroy several lives at once. Maria del Carmen Sosa's fate, as Raul Santana now discovered, was very tragic. She discovered she was pregnant, already after moving to another city, where she had no friends or family. Adjusting to a new place was very difficult for Maria del Carmen. She felt sick constantly and, in the end, had to stay in a local hospital for the rest of her pregnancy in care. Unfortunately, a difficult pregnancy and childbirth severely crippled the young woman. After giving birth, Maria was able to live only 2 years, after which she died due to oncology that developed in a context of chronic stress. Santana's girlfriend deteriorated in just a few months, and no one was able to help her. They managed to name the baby girl born Milena. She considered the 2 years she spent with her to be the happiest of her short life. All that time, Maria tried to earn extra money as a seamstress at home, doing minor clothing repairs, and all that time she did not give up her dream of becoming a fashion designer someday. Unfortunately, bad fate dictated otherwise. After her mother's death, Milena, with the preservation of her family name, was placed in a specialized orphanage, where the girl spent her entire childhood and youth, having practically no memories of her mother, except what she could glean from the mouths of her mother's then neighbors. However, the girl did not forget for a minute the warmth that her tired and sick mother still managed to give her. Therefore, the first thing for the daughter and her duty, after the end of her life in the orphanage, was the search for her mother's grave, and to be able to repair and mend it. Milena then had just gotten a job as a cook in a small canteen located in the center of town, and with her first money erected a small but solid monument to her mother, and also put the fence in order and, of course, began to regularly monitor the cleanliness of her mother's last resting place. However, Milena's quiet life quickly began to repeat dangerous twists and turns, painfully similar to the tragic fate of Maria del Carmen. Just as her mother had once done, the girl met her future fiancé in the dining room, who turned out to be, no more and no less, the son of an influential civil servant. The boy arrived in his homeland that year, to take a break from his studies in London. Between the young people everything was fast as it was with Milena's mother, feelings exploded. However, unlike Raoul, her rich suitor was in no hurry to propose to his beloved. Unfortunately, she was just a beautiful toy for him, a way to have fun in the boring land of his ancestors. The relationship of the young people quickly went far enough, and Milena, finding out after a while about her pregnancy, immediately told her boyfriend everything. He, of course, did not want to know anything about the child. Having offered the girl money to get rid of him, the guy rushed to flee back to England, having made a real fuss to Milena. During the discussion, the boy promised the girl that, if she told her parents about this, she could no longer expect a quiet and proper life and work in that city. Milena was not one of the shy ones. After the departure of the unfortunate boyfriend abroad, the girl took the risk to turn to his parents for help. And this was her fatal mistake. The family of officials, sensing a possible scandal a kilometer away, did absolutely everything to destroy the girl's life and career. From then on, she was denied even the simplest and most miserable job, to the point that she was not even allowed to wash the floors. At this rate, Milena very quickly found herself below the poverty line, and now, being completely without means of livelihood, she was forced to wander pregnant through the streets of the city, from which she had no way of getting out. Upon hearing his daughter's story, Santana couldn't hold back his hoarse sobs. After all, he had just decided to look for the girlfriend he never had. The thing is, a few months ago, his dying father, Andres Santana, finally confessed to the monstrous hoax he and his mother had created about his son's life and his beloved girlfriend. Raoul himself could not immediately believe his ears, but when his father cited some facts as evidence, the surgeon had no doubt that he was telling the truth. After his father's funeral, Santana immediately began looking for a suitable private detective and, in opting for Agent Sanchez, he risked paying her cash a rather large amount up front so that she could find him at least some information about the fate of his first and only love. To be honest, the surgeon did not expect that the trail the detective could pull out of the dense tangle of the past could, in the end, not only lead him to the grave of his lost girlfriend, but also give him an encounter with his own daughter, since Santana had already lost all hope of being able to become a father. "Why are you crying, Raoul Santana?" Milena asked in surprise. Until the end, she thought that the man who had helped her in that awkward situation with the money was just an old acquaintance of her late mother. "I am crying because I finally found my real family." Without holding back the tears, the surgeon said, "Milena, the thing is that your mother and we wanted to get married, but the circumstances turned out so. In general, I am very guilty before her." "Guilty?" the girl asked cautiously. "For what?" "That I couldn't take care of my own daughter. Milena, I am a father, no matter how strange it may sound to you now. I hope someday you can forgive me and accept my help." Dropping the water bottle, the girl, without a word, threw herself on her new father's neck. She squeezed it between her arms and, despite her protruding belly, pressed herself against him as hard as she could. "Daddy! Daddy! I knew it, I knew you'd find me someday. Even when everyone else said otherwise, I always believed. I always. The girl looked up from Raul Santana's cheek, full of tears that she wiped away with the edge of her old sweater. Out of surprise, Santana covered his mouth with his hand. On the girl's neck shone the same medallion of her mother, which once became a symbol of fidelity and love as a couple. Also silently, the man pulled back the collar of his own sweater. Exactly the same necklace rested around his neck for all these long years. Milena, seeing the same silver dove, laughed with joy, and at that moment, her eyes were painted in exactly the same bluish gray that her mother had in moments of sincere happiness. A few months later, Milena gave birth to a healthy and strong baby boy, whom Raul Santana personally named Ivan. Ivancito was a true gift of destiny for his grandfather. The lithe, blonde child reminded Santana at the same time of himself as a child and of his beloved Amor. The boy inherited the same big gray eyes of his mother and grandmother. Milena's father bought his own apartment in the center, not far from his house, so that he could see his daughter and grandson every day. The girl was incredibly grateful to her father and, for her part, did everything possible so that he would not cease to feel the family care and sincere love of his daughter. After a while, when Ivancito became a little older, Milena went to work, becoming a real chef in one of the best restaurants in the capital. In the same year, she was sent to Los Angeles for a short-term internship, where she could understand all the secrets of the real Hollywood cuisine. And, of course, the little girl did not forget to spoil her father with incredible dishes, who has since stopped spending his nights in loneliness and hunger, content only with the company of his beloved dog Chapulin. A year later, Santana's daughter met a great guy, an intern, who was doing an internship in Raul Santana's department. The young people liked each other and, after a while, real feelings arose between them, the result of which was a magnificent French-style wedding, which was held in the restaurant where Milena worked. The husband was pleased with Ivancito and accepted him as his own son. Now, while the youngsters were deservedly enjoying their honeymoon, Raul Santana was spending all his free time with his grandson. Little Ivan could play for hours with his grandfather's furry dog and not feel tired at the same time. All because this little boy is one of the first in the Santana family in the last 2 generations. He felt surrounded by the exceptional love and care of his relatives. And, therefore, this child had every chance to change, finally, for the better, the fate of his entire family. If you liked the story, please like and subscribe to the channel.